It's the middle of the night in 1789, and George Washington is sitting down not to some fancy French banquet, but to a plate of simple cornmeal pancakes, fried up golden on a hoe blade over an open flame. That's right, our first president, the man on the dollar bill, started his mornings with what farmers literally called hoe cakes, because in a pinch, that flat iron farming tool doubled as a griddle. And here's the thing. If you trace the favorite foods of every single president from Washington all the way to today, you're not just getting a list of snacks and comfort meals. You're getting a complete, edible history of America itself. You're watching the country grow up, one meal at a time, from cornmeal cooked over a fire to a filet-o-fish wrapped in paper. So grab a seat, because we're about to eat our way through 250 years of the American presidency. Let's start right at the beginning, in the early republic, when the United States was still figuring out what it even meant to be American, at the table and everywhere else. George Washington, as we said, loved his hoe cakes, but he wasn't picky about ceremony. This was a man who valued simplicity, and that carried right through to his breakfast table. His successor, John Adams, was a different story entirely. Adams was a New England man through and through, and he preferred what's called a boiled dinner, a hearty pot of local meat and whatever vegetables the season provided, simmered together until it was warm and filling. It's the kind of meal that says everything about early New England life. Nothing wasted, everything practical, and deeply tied to the land right outside the door. Then comes Thomas Jefferson, and suddenly the story takes a sharp turn. Jefferson had spent years in France as a diplomat, and he came home utterly infatuated with French cuisine. Most famously, he fell in love with vanilla ice cream, and some historians credit him with bringing the very first vanilla ice cream recipe back to American shores. Try to imagine that for a moment. While most Americans were eating salted meat and cornmeal, Jefferson was up at Monticello enjoying a chilled, sweet, vanilla-scented dessert that felt like it belonged in a Parisian salon. It's one of the earliest signs that the presidency, even from its earliest days, would become a place where American taste met the wider world. After Jefferson came James Madison, who kept things closer to home with Virginia smoked ham, a dish deeply rooted in the culinary traditions of the American South. Then James Monroe favored spoon bread, a soft, almost custard-like baked cornmeal dish that practically melts on a spoon. It's comfort food in its purest early American form. John Quincy Adams took a different approach altogether. He was famously health-conscious, and he filled his diet with fresh fruit grown right in his own garden, plums, apples, and peaches, long before anyone was talking about farm-to-table eating. In many ways, he was ahead of his time. Andrew Jackson brought some bold flavor to the White House with beef tenderloin dressed in what's called Jezebel sauce, a sweet and spicy blend of apple, pineapple, and pepper that would have been considered adventurous for its era. Martin Van Buren, on the other hand, had a taste for boar's head, which he'd proudly serve at his Christmas parties, a dish that harkened back to old European feasting traditions. And then there's William Henry Harrison, whose story is almost too good to be true. He genuinely loved squirrel stew, and he served it at his campaign rallies to connect with everyday frontier voters. It's hard to imagine a modern candidate doing the same, but in the 1840s, it made him seem like a man of the people. John Tyler found comfort in sweet, aromatic chess pies, a Southern dessert staple that's still beloved today. James Polk kept things humble with ham and cornbread, a meal that speaks to his reputation as a no-nonsense, hard-working president. Zachary Taylor had a taste for callas, which were fried sweet rice dumplings with roots in Louisiana Creole cooking, showing just how much regional cuisine was starting to shape presidential palates. Millard Fillmore preferred something called resurrection pie, a savory English-style pie, while Franklin Pierce enjoyed fried pastries known as Fanny Daddies. And James Buchanan, interestingly enough, is credited with popularizing sauerkraut at the White House, a nod to the growing German immigrant influence on American food. Then we reach Abraham Lincoln, a man whose humble beginnings on the frontier shaped his simple tastes. Lincoln was passionate about corn cakes, a food that connected directly back to his prairie upbringing. Andrew Johnson, who took office after Lincoln's assassination, loved Hoppin' John, a Southern dish built from black-eyed peas, tomatoes, and peppers, a meal with deep roots in African-American culinary tradition. Ulysses S. Grant had a curious daily habit. He reportedly ate rice pudding almost every single morning for breakfast, a small, sweet ritual for a man who'd spent so much of his life on hard military campaigns. Rutherford B. Hayes loved corn in just about every form imaginable: corn on the cob, corn soup, corn fritters, and of course cornbread. James Garfield, much like William Henry Harrison before him, had a taste for squirrel, though his version came as a hearty soup. Chester Arthur, known for his more refined tastes, delighted in turtle steaks, a delicacy of the era. Grover Cleveland was devoted to corned beef and cabbage, a dish that reflected the growing Irish immigrant influence on American cuisine. Benjamin Harrison loved a rich holiday fig pudding, and rounding out the 19th century, William McKinley preferred red flannel hash, a hearty mix of beets and potatoes that got its name from the deep red color the beets gave the dish. Now, as we cross into the 20th century, you can really start to feel American cuisine shifting. The country is industrializing, immigration is reshaping the culinary landscape, and comfort food starts to take on the flavors we recognize today. Theodore Roosevelt, a man known for his larger-than-life energy, loved fried chicken smothered in white gravy, about as classic and hearty an American dish as you can find. William Howard Taft, the heaviest president in American history, reportedly ate 12-ounce steaks daily, favoring high-protein meals that matched his substantial frame. Woodrow Wilson preferred fried Virginia ham cut into strips, keeping with those old Southern traditions, while Warren Harding had a taste for sauerkraut served alongside knockwurst, another nod to German-American food culture taking hold across the country. Calvin Coolidge, famously known as Silent Cal for how little he spoke, had a surprisingly sweet tooth, favoring a jelly roll filled with strawberry jam and finished with lemon icing. Herbert Hoover, who would go on to lead the country through the early years of the Great Depression, had an unusual favorite: caramel tomatoes, a dish that sounds almost experimental by today's standards. And then we arrive at Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose favorite food might be the most relatable on this entire list. FDR loved a good grilled cheese sandwich. Simple, warm, comforting, exactly the kind of food a nation gripped by depression and then wartime rationing could hold on to. Harry Truman kept things equally down to earth with cornbread and sorghum syrup, a taste that connected back to his Missouri roots. Dwight Eisenhower, a man who'd spent years commanding troops in the field, preferred slow-cooked beef stew and warm tomato broths, hearty meals built for sustaining energy. John F. Kennedy, with his New England upbringing, was devoted to fish chowder, a dish that ties directly back to his Massachusetts coastal roots. Lyndon Johnson swung the pendulum firmly toward Texas, with a passionate love of beef and pork barbecue that reflected his home state's culinary pride. And then Richard Nixon, interestingly, kept his lunches light with something as simple as cottage cheese, a small detail that somehow humanizes one of the more complicated figures in presidential history. Now let's move into the late 20th century, and you'll start to notice something. American food is becoming faster, more branded, more connected to the everyday grocery store and drive-through experience that most of us grew up with. Gerald Ford loved a comforting pot roast served with red cabbage. Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer from Georgia, had a fondness for cheesy grits, a true Southern staple. And then there's Ronald Reagan, whose love of Jelly Belly jelly beans, especially the licorice flavor, became something of a national story. Reagan actually used the jelly beans to help him quit smoking, keeping a jar on his desk in the Oval Office, and jelly bean companies even created special red, white, and blue mixes in his honor. George H.W. Bush is remembered almost as much for what he refused to eat as what he loved. He famously declared his hatred of broccoli, but on the flip side, he had a genuine love for pork rinds doused in Tabasco sauce, a snack about as unpretentious as it gets. Bill Clinton's food story often starts in childhood, with chicken enchiladas holding a special place in his heart from his younger years in Arkansas. George W. Bush, meanwhile, had a rather unique favorite, a custom cheeseburger pizza made specially by White House chefs, combining two great American comfort foods into one. Barack Obama brought something personal to the table too, a homemade bowl of chili made from what he's described as a secret recipe from his college days, a dish he'd still whip up for family and friends. Donald Trump became known for his love of McDonald's, specifically the Filet-O-Fish sandwich, a fast food favorite that became something of a cultural talking point during his time in office. And Joe Biden rounds out our list with a simple, classic love of vanilla chocolate chip ice cream, a dessert about as all-American as they come. So what does all of this tell us, really? When you step back and look at the whole picture, from Washington's cornmeal whole cakes cooked over an open flame to Biden's scoop of vanilla chocolate chip ice cream, you're watching America's entire culinary journey play out. You're seeing the shift from farm and hearth cooking to regional Southern and New England traditions, to the immigrant flavors of German sauerkraut and Irish corned beef, to Depression-era comfort food like grilled cheese, all the way up to the fast food culture that defines so much of modern American life. Every single one of these men, whatever else history remembers them for, sat down at the end of a long day and reached for something familiar, something warm, something that felt like home. And in a strange way, that's the most relatable thing about the presidency. Behind the speeches, the decisions, and the weight of the office, there was always just a person, looking for a comforting bite to eat, same as the rest of us. If you enjoyed this trip through presidential history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more forgotten stories from America's past. And let us know down in the comments, out of every dish on this list, which one would you actually want to sit down and try for yourself?